Remember that you are dust, and to dust you shall return. In the name of the one holy and living God. Amen. It was the morning of July 4th, a gloriously sunny day in the Czech Republic, and the swallows feeding their young seemed completely at odds with arriving at the gates of Theresienstadt, a one-time prisoner of war camp turned concentration camp by the Nazis during World War II. It was notorious because the International Red Cross had entered this camp and made a film there that was broadly distributed. During the filming, the Nazis were on their best behavior. The Jews and other prisoners were tended medically, given ample food, and their living quarters cleaned and outfitted with beds and blankets. Then the Red Cross left and shared the message that while people were imprisoned, it was, after all, wartime. And life at Theresienstadt was within the standards of prisoner of war camps. The Red Cross never saw the fields where people who arrived were chosen summarily for immediate execution. They never saw the single-line railroad track that led east with only one stop, Auschwitz. Remember. You visit a place like Theresienstadt not only to learn, but to remember. You remember that 6 million people were killed because they were of an unacceptable religion, ethnicity, race, and sexuality to the Nazis. You remember that both the Protestant and Catholic churches were complicit in this act, having traded away their identity as children of God for the identity of being an Aryan race and nation. You remember that being a good person is not enough when you are silent, looking away from this unspeakable example of what human beings can do to one another. You visit a place like Theresienstadt so that you remember fully, not simply as information lodged in your brain, but as a lived, embodied experience of what has been, of what is, and what could be. Remember. Paul announces in that jumble of letters to the church at Corinth, possibly the most troubled congregation he ever served, or anyone else for that matter, that God intends to do nothing less than restore the most wayward and broken of creation. And in the event I didn't already know it or had forgotten, we are profoundly incapable of being the people that God intends us to be. Our hearts intend destruction too often. We subject others to paths of unchosen endurance, of suffering. But on this day, when we remember that we are but dust, this is not a call to hopelessness. There is grace in remembering our mortality before God, because with the memories of the injustice and mercilessness that we can inflict on others comes another memory, a faithful memory of God's love for sinful people. It is that memory that allows us to lay down all pretense that we can redeem ourselves, camouflage our vulnerabilities, claim blessings that have a whole lot more to do with us than with God. We cannot justify ourselves before our Maker of all things good. We are completely exposed. Remember. One commentator put it this way: we come to this Ash Wednesday in order to build a Lent that becomes a life. We are invited to remember so that we can imagine ourselves as the justice of God, embodying God's reconciling mercy and love that is given to set the world right. Such redemption comes with a heavy cost for Jesus, who also lived as we do in the tensions that characterize our lives. And we live them every day. We hope for freedom from racism that eats away at our souls and the soul of this city, while we remain embedded in a culture and systems that have accelerated at feeding the lie that is either white supremacy or white nationalism. Like the efforts, however small, to lift our children out of violence and poverty, to take to the streets in prayer and peace, to reclaim men and women from the stumbling block that is either a prison record or recovery from addiction, or both. This day, this Ash Wednesday, is one moment in time at the start of this Lenten season to press the reset button. Remember, things that divide us, places of great evil, remain as reminders of never again. Reconciliation does not erase a tragic and evil history of any kind. Instead, reconciliation allows us to reconstruct such history honestly and repair its effects justly. Reconciliation is not a deterrent against sorrow, loss, or death, notes one writer, but it is a divine stand against the decline of all things into chaos and evil. Our life and death are linked because through the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus, as he became the servant of real and everlasting life, that's when he became the possibility for this being our destiny too. This day prepares us for renewing our faithful imagination that prayerfully seeks a way forward, a way to practice God's redemptive politics, to show forth a rule of love. Remember, the last stop in the tour of Theresienstadt is an enormous graveyard. As the camp was liberated, all human remains scattered throughout the camp were brought to this place and buried with prayers that were both Jewish and Christian. The full identification of all these people remains an ongoing project. Some graves have flowers. On all are stones, stones for remembrance of those who died, of the lives lived, of the God who has embraced them at the last. My family with me found stones, often digging in the grass to find them. And we laid them on graves until we were summoned, like so many others, to the bus and a return trip to our riverboat. On that July 4th, it was a powerful remembrance of what it means to give of ourselves to what is greater than ourselves. It was a moment to remember that such a giving is personal, familial, and communal. This giving practiced is a costly way of life, not more items on the to-do list. But like God's grace, this giving can change us. And then perhaps the world may glimpse the one who loves us enough to breathe life into our dust and bind that dust to glory.